Hi there, everyone. It's Stephen. In this video, we're going to go through one of the two algebra-related topics on your GED test called graphs and functions. And as we see here, it accounts for 25% of your GED questions, which is about 11 or 12 questions. So let's check out what we got in this section here. Which value for x would make the relation not a function? Okay, so in this question, if you know exactly what they're asking you to do and you know exactly the process to get to the answer, this could be a 10-second question by design. What makes this question difficult is that it's a very technical question. First of all, let's talk about what it is, by what they mean by relation. So they're talking about the set of these four pairs of numbers. Here's the first pair of numbers, second pair, third pair, and fourth pair. Sometimes you might even hear that called a set, but that's what they're referring to as, in this case, as what they mean by the relation. So that group of pairs of numbers as a whole is what they're referring to as the relation. They're assuming already that you know that the first number is an x number and the second number is a y number. This way of organizing numbers, two numbers in parentheses separated by a comma, is called an ordered pair. It's a pair of numbers that's always in the order of an x number followed by a y number. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is what they mean by the word function. Every x number is paired with only one y number. Every x number is paired with only one y number. So in this question, in this relation, if we take a look at the first two numbers, 0 and -1, the 0 is an x number, and it's paired with a -1 for its y number. And the same could be said for the 3 being always paired with -4, and the -8 is always paired with 13. So what would make this not a function is if we chose a number here for x that has already been used, that's already been paired with a number. In this case, that answer is 0. If we chose 0 for this x, then it would basically say that 0 is paired with 2 as its y value. But 0 was already paired with -1 in the first set of points. That would cause a little bit of a dilemma where 0 as an x number is paired now with -1 and 2. You see, every x number has to be paired with only one y number for it to be a function. And if we made x equal to 0, that would not be the case. That would make it not a function, which is why C is the correct answer. Which equations have a positive slope? Drag and drop the values in the correct location. Sometimes I refer to slope as rate or rate of change. So when you are presented with an equation that begins as y equals, the rate number or the slope number, as they're referring to it here, is the number that is multiplied by the x. Let's say that y represents money and x represents gallons of gas. So this equation then would be comparing how a cost or money is related to the number of gallons of gas that might be purchased. So let's say you go to the gas pump and gas is costing $4 per gallon. So then you would take 4 and times it by how many gallons you put into your tank, and that would equal your total cost. So what that means for this question, we're really only interested in all of the numbers that are multiplied by x. Whatever number gets multiplied by x stands for the rate. So in this first one, there's a fraction actually that gets multiplied by x, but the fraction is -2/5. So since that is a negative number, it's like a negative rate. In the second equation, we have the number 5 in front of x, and that is a positive rate. Not much different from the example that I gave where 4 was the rate, $4 per gallon of gas. In fact, we could even take this second equation and give it a little bit of meaning. If we think of Y as total cost and X as gallons of gas that you purchase. 5 would then be the rate, $5 per gallon. And then this minus 6 part out here would indicate that maybe you have a coupon for $6 off because you're taking the total cost and subtracting 6 from it. It's a good exercise sometimes to try to give meaning to these. So now I'm going to be dragging all the uh, negative slope values or negative rates into column 2, and I'm going to be doing the same with all the positive rates. Positive 5 over 3, positive 2 over 3, and negative 4. So not all the locations are used, but that's okay. Which point on the graph represents the ordered pair negative 2, comma 2? All right, well, since these two numbers are in parentheses, separated by a comma, we know that the order in which they come is always the x number first, comma, the y number second. So when it says negative 2, comma 2, we want to look first at where negative 2 is on the x line, which is right here. And then positive 2 on the y line is right here. And then we kind of want to follow those in until we get where they match up at on the grid. So we follow 2 over and negative 2 up. And right there we get the point D. What is the slope of the line given? Hint, use the formula sheet to determine the formulas needed to solve the problem. And we see here a grid, and there's 2 points that are kind of standing out, and then a line connecting them. It is true that there is a formula on the formula sheet that can help us solve this question, but I would like to try to give you an alternative that I think would be easier. Now, the cool thing is it's always going to be like that with rates. Whatever comes first is always the y numbers per x numbers. So rates are super helpful because they can actually give meaning to the letters y and x as they're used in the math equation. The rate itself shows how the two things are linked. Now, how does that help us ultimately answer this question, though? I said I wanted to set out to perhaps explain this question a little bit easier than having to look at the formula sheet. Well, if you can remember that the rate is always the y number divided by the x number, then you can calculate the rate or the slope by looking at how much the y number changes and divide that by how much the x number changes. Let's look at this first one over here. This point is at the location 3 for its x number, comma, 6 for its y number. You see? So those two numbers, 3 and 6, are like the x and y numbers that are kind of embedded in that single point. They're kind of hidden numbers, but they're there, describing its location. For the second point, then, its location would be at negative 6 for the x number, comma, positive 6 for its y number. So there are the pairs of numbers now that we can use to calculate the slope. We just got to look at how much the y numbers change by and divide that by how much the x numbers change by. So the y numbers go from 6 to 6. So that's actually a change of 0. Now we divide that though by how much the x numbers change. Negative 6, positive 3. Now that's a change of positive 9. So to get our slope, we just have to pull up a calculator and do 0 divided by 9. Now, something you may already know is that anytime you do 0 divided by any number, the answer is going to be 0. The graph represents the distance traveled by a car traveling at a constant speed. What is the slope of the linear equation? So what we're being asked to do here is to get the rate according to this graph. And you can see it's a little bit harder to see actually, but they do have 2 points that we can use to help us, just like we did in the previous question. They do throw some more fancy words in here. They say linear equation. You might be thinking, rightfully so, I don't see any equation anywhere. And there is no equation. So why do they use the word equation? I don't know. And then they say use the word linear. Well, linear just means that if we were to graph it, it would form a line. And in math, all lines are perfectly straight lines. So linear is an appropriate word to use here because it's describing a line, but without any curves in it. but I don't know why they even use the word equation. The first one is at the location 2, comma, and then if we look real carefully at our scale here, it goes from 100 to a blank to 150. So halfway between 100 and 150 is 125. So now we just need to calculate how much the y changes and divide that by how much the x changes. The y goes from 125 to 250. Now that's an increase of 125. And we're going to divide that by how much the x changes, which is from 2 to 4. So we divide it by 2, 62.5. So this car is traveling at an average speed or average rate of 62.5 miles per hour. Now you'll notice though 62.5 is not one of the answers that they're allowing us to click on. They don't want us to put our answer as a decimal, which I think would be more helpful in everyday life to say I'm going 62 and a half miles an hour. But instead they want us to take a step back and actually go back to where it was before we even did the division. So 125 divided by 2, they just want us to rewrite that as a fraction. 125 over 2. So that answer is B. What is the equation of the line that goes through the points -5, comma 4 and -3, comma -2? All right, so they've given us the minimum amount of information we need to write an equation that describes a line, aka a linear equation. Now, a linear equation has a very standard format, which looks like this. The y number is equal to some rate times the x number, and then we add some kind of starting number or subtract. So if you think back a couple questions to where they gave us an equation like this, and I provided some like meaning to what it could possibly stand for, it was y equals 5x minus 6, you might recall. And I mentioned how 5 was the rate number and 6 was like a discount. The number that's multiplied by x, as I've mentioned a few times now, is our rate number. And that's the first number we're going to figure out. Now, once we know the rate number, we're going to be a little clever about how we use the structure of the equation to figure out where did this equation start? Like, what is the starting number? Or what is that one time number that's either taken away or added to our total amount? So the first thing we need to do, as I mentioned, is calculate rate. Now, the nice thing is that nothing changes. We've been doing this exact kind of thing actually the last two questions. So we're just doing how much our y number changes divided by how much our x number changes. So our y numbers go from 4 to -2. So I'm going to put a minus in front of the 6 to indicate that it's going in a negative direction. It's going from a big number 4 down to a negative number, which is actually -2. Now the x numbers go from -5 to -3, means I'm actually going up by 2. Now if we divide those numbers, we'll get our rate. -6 divided by 2 is equal to -3. So now that I know that the rate is equal to -3, I can actually look over at my answer choices and get it down to just two possible answers. Because remember, our rate number is always the number that is multiplied by x. It can't be A and it can't be B because both of those answer choices say that the rate is -1/3, whereas C and D show the correct rate, which is -3. Now, the one difference though is that number at the end. Okay, so here's how we're going to finalize our answer and figure out whether it's +11 or -11 at the end. Now, looking at our two answer choices, we know that our answers should look something like this. Y equals -3x, and then plus some number at the end, whether it's 11 or whether it's -11. So I'm just going to put plus blank. Now, here's where we get a little creative. We can actually go back to one of our original pairs of numbers, which recall that those numbers in that order means an x number and a y number. So we're going to go back and choose one pair of numbers and then use those two numbers for the y and the x in the equation below. So it's totally up to you which pair of numbers you'd rather use between -5 and 4 versus -3 and -2. I'm just going to choose -5 and 4 because if I can, I like to avoid negative numbers and I want to try to keep my numbers small if I have a choice. So I'm just going to go with that. -5 is an x number. So what that means is I'm going to change my x right here to -5, you see? And I'm going to change this y to 4. I'm going to keep everything else as it is. I'm going to then multiply where it indicates. So this -3 being right up next to the -5 in parentheses means multiplication. And -3 times -5 is positive 15. A negative times a negative is a positive result. And we end up with 15 here. So what is the only number that will make this true? What is the only number that we could put in for that blank, that missing box right there, that will make it true? Well, we know that it can't be positive 11, actually, because 15 plus 11 certainly does not equal 4. So that means it has to be negative 11, because 15 plus negative 11, or you could even just put it like this, 15 minus 11 equals 4. So negative 11 is the number that would make that true. So therefore, negative 11 must be the number at the end. And that makes D our final answer. Which of the following graphs could be represented by the table shown? So you can see here that I've grouped all those numbers together as 5 ordered pairs. Okay, so let's go down and see which graph matches these 5 points. First one I'm going to look at actually is 0, 0, because that is right where the x and y axis meet. So we know that there should be a point at 0, 0. So this first graph there is, second graph there is, third graph there is, and fourth graph there is. Okay, so that was not at all helpful in narrowing down our answers. So let's look at another one that's kind of easy. 2 comma 2. They're both positive numbers and they're relatively small numbers. So 2 comma 2 is right here. So it could be A. All right. Now there we go. See, we already have one that we can rule out. So it cannot be B because 2 comma 2 is not on this curved line. And also, it cannot be C. And it can't be D. So right there we go. That single pair of numbers, 2 and 2, was enough to, by process of elimination, help us get our answer. What is the equation of a line that goes through the point -2 comma -4 and has a slope of -7? Okay, a pretty similar question compared to one we just had a couple questions ago. But this time they actually give us the rate right off the bat. So it just saves us that one step. And that also allows us to quickly rule out two of the answers. It can't be C or D because those are showing that the rate is -18. We know that the rate number has to be multiplied by x, so our answer has to be either A or B. So we can skip that step and go straight into the step of figuring out what that number is at the end, which would make the equation true. Like before, I'm going to use a pair of x and y numbers. Now this time I only have one to choose from. I can't, I have to use -2 and -4 for my x and y. Okay, and then we multiply -7 times -2, which is positive 14. And then I ask myself, what number does this have to equal here for this equation to be true? Well, I can tell you it's not plus 18 because 14 plus 18 is going to end up being a humongous number. It must be minus 18 or -18. If f parentheses x equals 2x squared plus 3x minus 1, what is the value of f parentheses -6? Ultimately, what they want us to do here is they want us to change x to -6 and then perform all the calculations. We want to look at every place where there's an x and change it to -6 and then calculate. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to just erase the x in red. I'm going to replace it with -6. I'm going to put it in parentheses to indicate that I've replaced it. And then I'm going to start solving. So I want to do exponents first here because an exponent comes first in our order of operations. In general, you want to do all the most complex operations first and then work our way down to the most basic ones, being adding and subtracting. So an exponent is the most complex operation here. So I want to do -6 to the second power first. Now that means -6 times -6, which is positive 36. Now that our exponent's gone, I want to knock out the multiplication, which is 2 times 36 and 3 times -6. And now all that's left is our adding and subtracting, which in this case just subtracting. So when x is -6, our answer is 53. Which of the following equations represents the graph given? Okay, since we're looking at a graph of a straight line, there's no curves to it at all, it's a straight line, then we know that our graph can be written in this format we've used throughout today's questions. Y equals our rate number times x plus some kind of starting amount. Now, you might recall from a couple questions ago that we had a line look very similar to this, and it was asking us what the slope of that line was. And we ended up calculating the y change was 0, and the x change was like 6 or 9, I think it was. And we did 0 divided by 9. Well, this is going to be no different. Every time you have a line that's just a horizontal line, the slope turns out to be 0. Go ahead and kind of shortcut this and say that the rate number here is going to be 0, and 0 times anything, whatever x is, 0 times anything is 0. So really, that means our equation will look more like something like this. Y equals blank, as weird as that is. So what is the number that y, that the, what is the number that y equals all the time, basically, in this, according to this line? No matter what the x number is, y is always at a height of 4. You see? 4 there, 4 there, 4 there, 4 everywhere. Anywhere along that line, y is equal to 4. So y equals 4 is the appropriate equation for that line. All right, I hope this video has been helpful for you. And we'll be returning in another video to talk about some more algebra concepts. But for now, keep up the good work, and we'll see you in the next video.